every time. Even my old favorites, I still have to add honey to it now before it becomes drinkable to me. It's kind of weird how it changed me from being a wine snob to not really liking wine that much, and unless I do that, add some honey to it. So,
right,
if you're watering down the grapes to get what I like to say, you're making space for the honey to shine. Why don't you speak to our listeners in regards to your thoughts about different selections of honey? Do you think that, in other words, do you try to pair up a given varietal of honey to a certain style of grape, or do you think that, by and large, a nice, as a wildflower, pretty much the go-to on all these things?
Pretty much every one of them that I have done, I have either used just kind of a simple clover honey or just a really good wildflower honey. The thing that I found is that the grape character is so strong and so powerful that you would really need a very intensely flavored honey in order to have that specific honey character to come through on the palate. So, I'm thinking maybe a blackberry blossom, something really intense that you could use to put in there, and that'd be the only thing that I would consider on that. That said, I've never tried it. I'm really in the Pyment category. You're really looking to showcase the grape with some honey backbone to it, and I really think, for the most part, that's what judges are looking for as well.
And most people, I think, at least initially, think of a Pyment as red grapes, but as you know, they're white grape Pyments too. Do you have any particular favorite white grapes that you like to use? And I guess that same question for the red grapes.
I definitely have some favorites on the red grapes. One of my absolute favorites is Nebbiolo, which is a fairly unusual, huge red Italian grape, and makes just fabulous. It's fabulous wine too. But you'll go into even the giant liquor stores; they may have 2 or 3 bottles of it. It's very unusual to find here in the States, but it really is the king of red grapes, and just really bold flavor, lots of jammy character to it, lots of blackberry and plum and the dark fruit characters and whatnot coming through. It's just a beautiful red. I have also been playing with Cab Sauv, which is really fun, and I've had a lot of success with Malbec. But I would say that the Nebbiolo, as far as the reds go, is my absolute favorite on the red grapes.
And then how about for white grapes?
I played around with Chardonnay, and I wasn't really impressed with it. It did not really present as a Chardonnay. It was more like mead made with white grape juice. I mean, it was meh. It didn't really care for it. So I think on my next attempt, I'm going to try doing like a Moscato or something like that, and trying to play around with something that's got a lot more intense flavor to it as far as whites go. I haven't been tremendously motivated to do this because I don't like white wine. So, but one of these days, I'm sure to try it. So, it's on my to-do list.
Yeah.
It's a long to-do list, though.
Okay, we've got questions.
Bob is asking if you do you use a different yeast for your red and your white?
I found with the reds, I use the same yeast every time on the reds, and when we start getting into yeast selection, I can get more into that. On the white side of things, I use the same yeast as I used for my reds, and like I said before, it just was meh. It didn't have any kind of character to it. But a few years back, I was doing some different yeast trials, trying a bunch of different things, and I tried out a White Lab Chardonnay yeast, and I used that on a traditional mead, and I kid you not, I made a Chardonnay with no grapes in it. It had just tremendous Chardonnay character. It had that buttery kind of very slight oakiness to it, despite not seeing any oak. But really nice and buttery flavor to it, nice acidity. So if I was to do that again with Chardonnay grapes, I would absolutely grab a Chardonnay yeast. That experiment basically told me that the flavor in a Chardonnay comes more from the yeast character than from the grape itself, which I found just fascinating and continue to try yeasts all the time.
That really is neat.
Yeah.
I remember reading that somewhere along the line. I was reading a book about winemaking, and they said something about Chardonnay is really very yeast dependent. And I've never made a Chardonnay, so, I just kind of read it and went, oh, okay, and then kind of forgot about it until you just said that.
Right. And, interestingly enough, it behaves very much like a Chardonnay as well. I have a couple of bottles of it left, and I made this 5, maybe 6 years ago, and now it has basically completely fallen apart, just like a 6-year-old Chardonnay would. I mean, the whites just don't age very well, and I found that part of it very interesting as well. It's still fairly tasty, but it doesn't have any of that Chardonnay character to it at all.
It's really interesting. Did you didn't ask David Webb's question, did you, AJ?
No.
Okay.
No, David was wondering where you source your favorite grapes, and whether you use whole grapes or concentrate.
Everything that I have done as Pyments so far has been from a cheap wine kit that you get at the local homebrew shop. So the juice is already produced, grapes are pressed, everything's squeezed. I don't have any work to do other than open the plastic bag and dump it into a carboy and add honey. And that's kind of the way I like it. I don't have the equipment to deal with grapes. I really don't want to buy the equipment to deal with grapes. It's like a giant pain in the butt. Mead making's way easier, so why not do it that way?
And even if you don't have the equipment, you use somebody else's equipment, it's still a pain in the butt. I call it Chamerlot because I wanted to do a Chamberson Pyment, but I got to the local U-Pick grape yard a little late, and there was nothing left but gleaning. So I gleaned, and it was hot because it's North Carolina, and it was only September, and so I sweated right through my phone. I literally killed my phone sweating because I'd stuffed it into my shirt, so killed my phone, and picked enough grapes for about a half a batch, and I wanted to do a 5-gallon batch. So and the old guy that owned the place, he had a press, so he went ahead and squoze the grapes for me, and then asked me, did I want the skins? And I'm like, oh, hell yes. So I took the skins and the juice, and then went and bought a cheap wine kit with Merlot juice and mixed the two. And I wanted to see, I was curious to see, because both of those grapes are traditionally used to make a drier wine, so I wanted to see what would happen as if I did something sweet. And it turned out great. I've still got a few bottles of it. Right. I'll have to bring one to the Mazer Cup. I think I've got 2 bottles of it left.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I've just been fascinated on how, a grape that is typically presented dry as a wine just ends up being fabulous, even as a sweet mead, even dessert-style mead.
That's what this one was, dessert
just come
style.
across
It's
beautifully.
Sweet. Yeah, but it's mellow. I mean, my friends all call it I was doing active living history stuff at the time, so I was the bringer of the mead because we always had cast parties after the event was over. At the end of the day, we go back to the dorms, and I would break out the mead. And they took to calling it the sacramental wine because it was a big, bold, huge mouthfeel, sweet mead,
Right.
you know, and I thought it turned out pretty good. And the funny thing is now it's actually sweeter than I generally drink because I've moved towards a more of a semi-sweet kind of drinking profile in the intervening years since I've made it. But at the time, it was like, damn, this is just totally awesome, you know. So it's pretty good.
Yeah,
it's just sweeter than I
absolutely.
generally like. So I may bring it just to make it go away.
Right. Yeah. Yep. So I have been looking around for a better source for the grape juice because even buying the wine kits, it does make for an expensive batch of mead because you're throwing $70 to $120 on a wine kit plus the honey, and then you're throwing the yeast and everything else in there. It makes for a fairly expensive batch of mead. And so I've been looking around for a better way to get the grape concentrate and trying, with my favorite Nebbiolo grapes, trying to source that directly from Italy as well has proven to be very difficult. If I lived on the coast, I might be able to get it shipped directly to a winery, but then I have to pick it up from said winery. Doesn't work well for being in Colorado.
Yeah, it doesn't. Totally. Bobby...
So I'm still on the hunt for that.
Bobby Slants asked earlier, hang on, let me roll. Oh, no, it wasn't Bobby. It was Joe Abruzzo. Says, since I can't hear, he's still at work, and he's going to catch up later. He wanted to know what your thoughts are on skins. How long do you leave it sit on the skins? If you have skins. Obviously, if you're using a cheap wine kit, there may not be skins.
Exactly. With the wine kits, often you don't get skins. Occasionally you will, and I get super excited when I have them. And what I've been doing with those is I'm just throwing them in the primary, and pretty much all of my primary fermentation is done within 30 days, even on really big, like 1.16 meads. And I will leave those grape skins in the primary for the entirety of that primary and then just rack off of them.
Okay. Yeah, I think I let mine sit.
I feel like...
I think I sat mine on the skins for the entirety of primary and then racked off the skins when I went into secondary, which was, if I remember right, about a month.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that I found in playing around with Pyments is... trying to play by your typical winemaking rules doesn't really work. Once you add the properties of honey to it, all bets are off. It's not going to behave like a wine. Mm-hmm. And you need to really treat it like a mead. I've been screaming for years that mead is not wine. It's its own thing. Just the properties of honey and whatnot. And when you start fermenting that, it's just something completely different from a wine or beer or a distilled beverage,
Yeah, I mean, it's all the same tools, and the overall fermentation process is similar, but yeah, all the little niggly details are definitely different.
Right. Yeah, you need to change your expectations if you're expecting wine results.
Well, it's not a wine, it's a mead, right?
Exactly.
So, David, let's talk about what yeast you like and why.
So, the yeast that I've been most successful with in my Pyments has been K1V 1116. And there's a couple of reasons that I chose that particular strain of yeast. One is that is a fructophilic yeast, basically meaning it's going to go after fructose before it goes after anything else, which is a somewhat unusual property of yeast. And given the fructose content of honey, it made sense to me to use a yeast that is fructophilic so that you are ensuring that your yeast is eating up all of your honey to create alcohol, rather than going immediately to eating up your grapes, and you lose all of that grape flavor, and then it switches over to fermenting the fructose at a slower rate on top of that. So the fructophilic factor is a pretty huge one for me, especially in the Pyments. And I find